This is Space Ants, Brace for Impact, an original composition by Eric Kay. Scintillatrix was a signaller. She had acute vision and two lengthy 10-jointed antennae which glowed silver in the sunshine. She was at the base of the siege tower. As it grew, she relayed signals from others of her caste positioned on the structure. She stood on her hind legs in an exaggerated stance to ensure that the other signaller ant received the postured message correctly through the void of space. The signallers had a white side and a dark side. This evolutionary trait allowed space ants to simply flip over and reflect or absorb sunlight to regulate their temperatures. But this had the added benefit of enhancing postured communications over long distances. Above her, the giant tower wavered in the sky. Even though at zero gravity, undamped oscillations could crash the giant structure of ants. She watched it slowly approach the strange green sphere. We'll keep calling them Green Sphere for convention's sake. Communicating the colony by their actual name is impossible unless you want to sprout a pair of sensitive feelers from your head. Scintillatrix was the most important segment of the communications relay. She sat near the great door ants. Other signallers flashed messages up and down the line. More workers. Her antennae instructed to the door ant. The door ant secreted scents from their gaster, which was inside. This attracted workers to the bottom of the door ant. The new workers exited to replace others who needed to cycle back in for air. Time passed, but she kept her gaze on the next chain in her signal troop. She ignored the scene unfolding above her. Standing at the ready, a different signal was flashed. Danger, and then another sign. Surprise attack. Soon she saw the flash of a signal she had never had to relay before. Retreat. Scintillatrix pounded her legs to translate the visual gesture into a seismic one that the interior colony could hear. The colony pounded back one last command from inside. Push away. And Scintillatrix relayed that command back to the signallers on the long tower. With one last extension, the tower shoved the two colonies away from each other. Peace for now. The first battle against Green Sphere concluded with a draw. Scintillatrix stayed at her post until the next signaller came. Then she folded up her elongated antennae and cycled back inside. There was general agitation and anxiety. Numerous workers scurried about. She and her fellow signallers tried to command them to return to their typical interior duties. The colony's fear died down, and all became orderly. Scintillatrix returned to her hutch. She folded up her sensitive antennae, unwilling to leave them out to be trampled by careless workers. After a few moments' rest, she heard summons searching through her hutch. Signallers needed. The worker ant relayed the order to her. Scintillatrix rose, unfolded her antennae, and asked, "Where?" "Prison," it said. She exited, climbed through the tunnels, and followed the chemical scent the worker laid down to the holding cell. The prisoner had been dejured and disabled, and Scintillatrix had no fear of being hurt by the captured enemy. She passed her antennae through a small opening into the prison hutch, where the enemy ant was entombed by construction slurry. She listened to it and felt its anxiety, terror, and the pain it felt from its wounds. "Job?" she asked. "Higgledy-piggledy," the green ant captive replied, utterly unintelligible. This would not be a quick job. "Population?" she asked and counted to 6 by tapping out on the ant's head. Tap, 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 tap. It knew its math, at least up to 6, because it replied with 6 taps. Scintillatrix used her antenna to point to the first joint of the ant's antennae. There she counted out 6 again. Did it know the mathematical shorthand? It failed to copy the pointer counting system. Ant math was base 6, and signaller ants could point to a segment of their antennae up to 10 joints and communicate up to 60 visually. That sexagesimal counting system left space ants with a highly composite number. They did not need to learn fractions. But the Green Sphere prisoner still comprehended nothing over 6. Again, Scintillatrix questioned the ant. "Queen count." But the garbled reply gave no help. "Find White Moon," she told a nearby worker. Perhaps there was an old signaller who could translate. While the request spread throughout the colony, Scintillatrix tried to teach the captured ant of Green Sphere about maths above 6, or discover if there was a different way to count above 6. A worker returned with one of the last remnants of White Moon. Their upper caste had been reduced to labourers, but this old ant was previously a signaller and in the past had crossed paths with the colony of Greensphere. Scintillatrix relayed her original 3 questions to the translator. The old ant put her antennae into the cage. Warriorka, can the answer to the first question? Some sort of undifferentiated ant able to kill or carry equally well. Many multitudes, the second answer came. 6 sixes came the final answer. Scintillatrix needed to use her antenna segment counting method to figure out how many that was. Was it 12? Smaller ants often had many queens, and a queen-strike assault would not have the same decisiveness. Or was it 6 times 6? 36 queens would be impossible for their colony to defeat by a war of attrition. With the help of White Moon's last signaler, they interrogated the prisoners for several more sleeps. Every day, they extracted a bite of new knowledge and transferred it to the colony. Each time Scintillatrix slept, dream ants came to collect her memories. Like a forager who brought a morsel back to the colony, the dream ants collected information. Dream ants were old signalers in the last few orbits of their life. She would become one if she survived. Those signalers did not have as high a casualty rate as other castes. In a chamber next to the queen, the dream ants gathered. None of them had an entire concept in their tiny minds, but united they could trigger each other and collectively process complex problems. The dream ants all laid down, each being able to touch another with their long antenna and touching others with their back legs. Each ant acted as a sort of crude transistor, able to hold and process a small amount of information before relaying it. There were circuits of feed forward to the center, feedback to the edges, and a very slow recursion, as a pile of ants could call more ants to solve a particular detail. 6 dreamers held themselves tight in the center, each sensitive and complex antenna laid over another's. Behind each dreamer, there was another row of 2 junior dreamers, followed by another of 4, then finally 8 signalers radiated out. 90 ants in a tight node. The colony thought. It seemed to remember that it got its ass bitten and impaled by ants half to a third their size. Those bitey tiny ants had a prize, and Black Sting could not simply forget it and navigate somewhere else. Plus, they might not have the option to escape. Greensphere was still close. They could attack any orbit, and Black Sting might be the prey. The first task was to assess the current count of castes, but first it needed more. Workers ferried out into all parts of the nest to gather more ants. Scintillatrix was roused. Arise, join, a dream ant called to her. This was the first time she had been called into Dream Ant Council. The collective had a second question to solve. What is an orbit? It thought. They were now captured by the Ice Moon, and their sighters had observed new faster orbits. They also appeared to be both orbiting their massive gas giant, which unmistakably dominated their horizon, and the Ice Moon. Other ants, with the ability to detect the several Gauss-strength magnetic fields, confirmed that they were still at the same distance from the gas giant's center, and the colony was far from falling into death. There was now a long, rarer eclipse, and a more frequent but briefer, smaller eclipse. The collective tried to calculate the ratio of mini-orbits to big ones. Scintillatrix was on the outskirts of the mass of dream ants. Today she was merely a counter. She readied herself and connected to the node. Tap, someone hit her exoskeleton. +1, and she dutifully incremented by crossing her antenna a certain way and holding that position. And so it went. Tap to add, tap hold to subtract, and her antenna moved appropriately. When the 10 joints were exhausted, she positioned one leg under, then another. She moved that leg out and put the next back until she could hold the place of any digit from 1 to 60. When or if she hit 60, she would then tap the ant in front of her and tell it to increment, while she reset her position. Another signaler ant, which held the number of their warriors, never reset. The colony had far less than 60 to defend itself. That was a dangerously low number, the collective thought. It sent a worker off to signal the royal chamber to differentiate more eggs into warriors. Eventually, the calculations finished. Scintillatrix reset her counter and retired to her hutch. The colony now tried to imagine or simulate how another battle with Greensphere might unfold. Black Sting could not invade, but it did not seem that Greensphere could attack back. Every attack they imagined on their rock left a choke point which a few of their warriors could hold. Even their colony's workers were larger than Green Sphere's default ant. But a direct hit, where the Green Sphere collided with the center of their colony, which was still a loose netting of rocks, gunk, and insect silk, might enable enough of an attack surface for their warriorkers to overrun the choke points. Black Sting needed a new strategy. The collective imagined. It passed signals between the other 6 and back down their line, only to get new impulses passed up. The dreamers dreamed, and the networked node devised a new plan. Scintillatrix woke and was summoned voidside for new duties. There she joined a Cyter, the literal definition of bug-eyed, an ant with the best vision in the colony. The Cyter was fixated on the ice moon below them. Scintillatrix could see the surface zoom by underneath. She had the second best visual acuity of the space ants. Though she did not know the significance of what she saw, the surface had impossibly long streaks of jagged lines punctuated by huge round craters. She placed her front right leg under the Watcher's back foot. Every so often, the Watcher would step back, signaling her to increment her counter. It was slow work, and she stood silently in the vacuum for many moments and watched nature's ballet below. One time, she saw a massive explosion. Another time, there were long strikes in a line. The silent spectacle of orbital bombardment was beautiful from their distance. After the impacts, she saw long white wisps of ice rising from the ice moon's surface. A silver rain. Ahead, in the direction of their orbit, she spied that thin, sparkling curtain extend up to their altitude. It looked like her colony would fly through one. The diffuse crystals were still enough for her to feel a faint impact against her exoskeleton. Tap, tap. It was unnerving at first, feeling sounds in the void. It was also strangely beautiful, not repetitive, yet not chaotic. It was creation's improvisational music, life's jazz. Finally, her Watcher had counted to 60. Another signaler came out, and Scintillatrix returned inside and caught a breath of fresh air. Then she reported her 60 to the network node. After a rest, she was summoned again to outer space. There she saw numerous workers holding on to the colony rock with their back 4 legs. They waved nets of insect silk in the blackness of space. Scintillatrix returned to a different Watcher and began the count anew. She was there for only a moment before she experienced the thickest shower. Ahead was a massive curtain of silver flying up from the surface of the ice moon, so dense she could not see any blackness through it. It looked like they were flying into a wall. Tat! Something struck her. Then the sky opened up with a rapid-fire tat-tat-tat as their colony flew through the ice plume. Tat-tat! Larger bits of ice hit her carapace. Bang! The tone changed as she was almost knocked off. She clung tight and low to the rock. She did not appreciate life's music anymore. Bits of ice struck the chest of other ants and deflected back onto the surface of their colony, hopefully without killing the ant. Other specks were stuck in the silk threads. Most ice simply deflected off into a new trajectory and went uncollected. But this was the best strategy present to hydrate the colony. When the colony flew through the plumes, it encountered drag. This new impetus slowed the colony down and regularized their orbit around the moon. The pursuit of water, a substance all life needed to survive, had led to them being captured. They were no longer in a horseshoe orbit, and even if they jettisoned everything, Black Sting could not return to the Lagrange points. Space ants were trapped, at least for many generations. After the plume strike, all was calm, and the sky was jet black. The colony had collected enough water to survive. The day had come to execute the colony's idea. The signalers were called up first. They received their orders and passed on the colony's command to the masses of waiting workers. Legs marched in unison, first 1s or 2s, then 3s or 4s. Scintillatrix and the signalers kept them in line and going the same direction on the outside of their rock. She felt a force. Her claws dug deep into the rock and substrate. Though it was so light a pull and so slow a rotation and was in no danger of being flung off, her body was still alarmed from the geyser flyby. She looked up and noticed the horizon rotated, or rather, their entire colony did. They were spinning now, and the force experienced was centrifugal. The central colony rock was the only one being deliberately spun. Other rocks, connected by masses of insect silk, trudged lazily but reluctantly followed along. It was slow work, and very little spin was created, which worked fine for now, as workers were still rearranging. Weavers were reconstructing the colony's parts into 2 clusters. Space ants had previously altered their center of mass to freely change their trajectory at Lagrange points. Every time the rotation's speed increased, weavers would cut, sew, and lengthen the insect silk that held the 2 masses together. The smaller mass contained several old husks, which were mined and stripped of any value and loaded with waste ice. The counterweight was nowhere near as heavy as the colony's main rock, and the entire structure rotated at a point about 1/6 the distance from colony to counterweight. Scintillatrix received posture communications from another sighter-signaler pair. They had spied the green sphere and sent an update on direction and velocity. The colony then attempted to alter their rotation, so the circle of the counterweight's traversal was in line with the direction of their enemy. Workers came, marched one direction, and adjusted the spin. Now it was victory or death, though death had 2 options: the slow death of evasion or the quick death of slaughter. The standoff lasted for almost 1 mini-orbit. The colony saw Greensphere altered its course and closed the distance. Scintillatrix was ordered into position. She climbed up the long-braided silk line to the tethered counterweight. Below her, soldiers followed. This could very well be a one-way trip. The colony might decide, in a moment of panic, to cut the line. That would give their home a sudden change of direction, which they might need to evade Greensphere. But this was no suicide squad. They did their duty to accomplish the task that gave them all the best chance of survival, and needless death was not in the plan. Past the center of mass, she felt the pull of invisible force. She looked up and saw far away, down the silken path, was her home. Down was the smaller hollowed-out rock, their makeshift home. It was 50 shades of white, black and grey, with the blue-green F2 small greenhouse ants. Then all went black. The white moon eclipsed them. A small dark circle appeared on the atmosphere of the Jovian-sized planet. Red light reflected off the cloud tops, bathing them in shades of crimson. Meanwhile, sunlight streaked through the penumbra opposite and lit the geysers in white, bright light. Scintillatrix was focused on her climb, and only saw the silk glow in a rose-silver hue. It was beautiful, if only because it was a shade of colour she had never seen. She did not have time to relish the immense celestial dance. She had a mission. If this be her last orbit, then at least it was the most visually memorable orbit of her life. Full sunlight suddenly returned. Below them, they saw the thin crescent of the moon's surface pass far below them. It appeared larger with each passing mini-orbit. Ahead of them was Greensphere, though none could see it. The direct sunlight hid it. No doubt, those enemy ants could see Black Sting's colony lit up by the light and its silver, grey, and black colours, unsuitably obvious in front of the red and brown swirls of the gas giant. They probably looked like a juicy prize, especially with the blue-green of their greenhouse ants, or the verdant holobiont eggs, which betrayed an otherwise dead exterior. Scintillatrix reached the counterweight. Outside, workers affixed obsidian to the front, according to the direction of the spin. She dove inside and breathed a little of the very thin air. The interior was a single room. 2 greenhouse ants bulged out the bottom, supplying their tiny fort with a little oxygen. More warriors came in, and each settled down and slipped into torpor. Scintillatrix folded up her antennae and also fell into sleep. Tomorrow, victory or death awaited. Scintillatrix woke to the rhythm of alarmed feet. All around her, her sisters felt the message and filed outside. After exiting their exterior tunnels, she looked up at the horizon. She spied the green sphere. It was blurry, but lit up in full sunlight. There, next to her, was a sighter. Blessed with great vision, these big-eyed ants could sense small changes of things in their field of view. Their eyes also had a clear bubble over them, which they could deform to give more telescopic sight. Scintillatrix watched their antennae as they signaled numbers to her. These were very crude estimates of distance, using colony length as a unit of measure. Wildly inaccurate, they were only space ants, not astrodynamicists. She stood there in the void and relayed many 60s, signaling that Greensphere was still over 60 colony lengths away. It also reported 2 direction numbers relative to the horizon. Another pair of ants sat on the colony's main rock, doing much the same. The node of dreamers, used these differing perspectives to calculate a parallax and gained an average but more accurate idea of where they were in relation to the enemy. Several signalers clung onto the thread that held the two sections, relaying information back up to the center of the colony. Scintillatrix finally received a new number, 59 for distance, and then a new direction. In a few moments, 58 and slight change in direction. Scintillatrix watched her watcher and did not see the green sphere accelerate toward their colony. 55, then 51. Scintillatrix continued to relay. Another signaler on the colony rock took in her information and relayed the information directly to the node of Dreamers. 44, 33. The colony node came to the same conclusion. Incoming. The message was relayed out seismically through the walls, then visually through the void. Other workers at both ends of either line tugged or loosened the silk to counter for Greensphere's adjustments. Greensphere was close. It still aimed for the colony's main rock, which wobbled not far off the barycenter. The other end, the counterweight, was within striking distance. Its sharpened point glinted black as they came down from behind the barycenter. Scintillatrix received the reply, "Brace for impact." She clutched the rock with every fiber of strength and tried to warn her sighter. Hold. The impact was several more moments delayed than what she initially thought. Spikes of the great green sphere rushed past them right before they impacted. Thwomp. The counterweight slammed with the force of a sharp rock thrown at a watermelon, enough to pierce the skin, but not enough to obliterate it in a shower of pulpy flesh. Scintillatrix was whiplashed off her small rock. She was flung toward the green sphere, and her body struck the middle of a spine, snapping the spike in half. Then her body cartwheeled end over end before hitting more and striking the ground. She bounced off the green skin and floated back up. Stunned, she floated weightless. She was also needing air as the collision knocked it out of her. She was caught in the underside of a thicket of spines and floated no further off. Panic set in. Death would be soon. She wiggled her antennae, trying to orient herself. Around her, bits of broken spines, green skin, and their shattered counterweight all weightlessly floated by. It was as though she were in a dream, where their tiny brains tried to simulate an unreal world. The counterweight had struck the sphere off-center. Both objects, now conjoined, reacted to the new spin together. Meanwhile, Blackstring's main colony rock, still connected by thick strands of lava silk, rebounded chaotically. Now the center of mass was based on two tightly connected objects and one loosely bound rock. Light passed into shadow, and now Scintillatrix saw nothing, but she felt air leaking out from a large crack. She climbed underneath into a small chamber. She got her torso fully inside, and her bulbous abdomen sealed her from the exterior. There, she tested the air and the pocket with her antenna. It seemed good, so she breathed in. It was too thin. She clawed at the wall and stabbed her foot through the fleshy interior and felt air rush back in. Ah. She crouched in the darkness for several more moments. Then, light returned feebly through the green skin, but enough to faintly illuminate the chamber. At the bottom was a small circle, possibly the opening of an interior stomata. She did not have the instinct to investigate and did not want to linger in case tiny ants swarmed her. She compressed the air back into her exoskeleton, removed herself from her hole, and searched for her sisters. Inside the counterweight, the ants had formed a buckyball shape, a cage of 60 ants, each interlocking their legs into a springy and impact-resistant structure. Each ant of the cage survived, though the greenhouse ants did not. They died slowly as their extended abdomens suffered mortal wounds. A few moments after penetrating the skin, Blacksting's warriors reconfigured themselves into a fighting force. Even the single door ant joined in. Its absolutely massive size allowed it to tower over any green ant, although its many orbits of immobility did not make it a good fighter. The survivors assembled around the broken remains of the counterweight which formed their fort. Scintillatrix staggered to the top of the broken rock. As leader of the assault, she organized her sisters. Hold rock. Darkness rolled over the battlefield. A few enemy ants emerged from the small holes past the impact point. Most crawled around looking for instructions they could not see. They wandered into death. Kill! Scintillatrix whipped her long antennae between allies, like some conductor guiding a bombastic orchestra of bloodthirsty killers. Fall back. Her touch commands ordered, and she cohered her force around the only defensible terrain. The counterweight strike had quaked the entire sphere and killed many of the smaller ants under the impact zone. Silver light from the moon lit up the field. Only a few ants of green sphere tried to counterattack, but the ripped skin and exploded internal rooms left few good approaches. There was insufficient space to swarm. The workers of Black Sting did what workers do. They labored. There in the fissures, they shoved in any tool they brought. They levered and wedged open the cracks, and as they hit new pockets of trapped air, those violently extended the fissure's length. With each new catastrophic rupture, a green ant or two which tried to counterattack was propelled off into deep space, and the ground became more defensible for Black Sting. Other workers carried fresh spikes or shards and further fortified the impact zone's perimeter. Full light returned, and with each passing rotation, Green Sphere's outside numbers soared. Probing, assaults were attempted at every angle around the counterweight fort. "There," Scintillatrix commanded. "Now there." She redirected her sister soldiers when she saw a counterattack begin. Each time, 3 or 4 of their warriors repositioned, legs side by side with another to blunt the swarm's counterattack. The hordes assaulted, practically piggybacked 3 high on a single approach. Obsidian blades glinted in the sun as Scintillatrix and the sisters slayed the mobs who attacked the fort. Tiny ants floated off, dead or soon to be, a cloud as thick as the ice geyser that pelted them earlier. 2 allied workers also dug straight down from the central impact point. When they encountered a pocket of air, the duo wedged a thicket of spines down. They alternated pushing and pulling, trying to lever the entire structure open. Though their task was comically miscalculated, they succeeded in puncturing ever deeper into the chambers and tunnels of Green Sphere. Inside, alarmed warriors tried to bite the spines instead of obeying the general order to attack topside. Chemical trails laid down in the interior air dissipated, and the counterattack of Green Sphere faltered. Whenever Green Sphere's internal big-headed ants felt a loss of pressure, they plugged the tunnels and further hampered the swarm. But did they quit? No. They're space ants, for God's sake. They didn't come this far to be eradicated by bigger ants. They did not survive so long by giving up at the first sign of battle or the first setback. Eventually, the signal of mass alarm spread through Green Sphere, and the entire colony assembled. Scintillatrix monitored the battle. She commanded certain workers to cut and saw off slabs of the green skin. The chunks floated off to be captured later. Now Black Sting had transformed the battlefield. They continued to cut large holes and expand the cracks into chasms, which made a better defensive line for Black Sting. More workers poured in over the silk line, bringing with them bits of previously harvested spikes, and placed them into the exposed green skin, forming thickets the small ants could not penetrate. Green Sphere, deprived of an open field, and still in shock, halted their attacks and reformed their own defensive line. They came out and around, but stopped short of where the skin was cracked or ripped. Another full rotation flashed its varied lighting. Scintillatrix calmed the warriors near her. Then she gestured back to the colony's main rock, which by now had floated much closer. Another signaller acknowledged her. She saw the humps of many allied ants climbing down the line before they disappeared into darkness. The chaotic rotation played with their eyes. In a few moments, silver light reflected off the ice moon. When would the assault happen? When would she finally know the battle's outcome? Would she taste victory or death? More allies descended, and each stayed close to their makeshift rock fortress. They waited and balanced on everyone, and stood in formation. Other signalers came to keep their brood together. "Move." Scintillatrix shoved a careless warrior who stepped on her antenna. Below the impact site, where many interior tunnels were pulverized and collapsed, Green Sphere was busy. Scintillatrix put her antenna into the gaping holes below and felt the vibrations. It was as though a million mandibles were chewing simultaneously. Tunnelers! She squeezed herself farther down and tried to sense where the green ants might push through. Death from below? Full light returned. Scintillatrix looked out into the distance, past the pulverized spikes, and in, where the thicket returned to fullness. There they all saw the masses of Greensphere, which acted as one. They chewed. Scintillatrix crawled around the perimeter, again keeping her warriors at the ready. On all sides, she saw the same thing. An entire circle of tiny ants chewed under the Greensphere's skin. Blackness doused Scintillatrix, and the scene disappeared. She tried to contact the deepest workers, who were still trying to lever with the spines or other crude tools. Everywhere on all sides were the continuous vibrations of chewing. The silver light returned and cast grey shadows everywhere. She looked up and saw the white moon. It filled the entire horizon. Ahead, a geyser reached up to their orbit. They were going to collide with a massive wall of ice water. Incoming! Tat! Ouch! Ice struck her antenna. Tat! Tat! Bang! It hit her exoskeleton. Tat! She held on. The silver rain pelted friend and foe alike. Several allied ants on the line were knocked off into the black death of deep space. The seismic rumbles of the ice plume's strike died. Silence returned, except it didn't. Below their makeshift fort, the vibrations of chewing never ceased. Sunlight returned along with warmth on Scintillatrix's exoskeleton. She was excited and even glad to have the warm sunshine bathe their battle. Hold. She kept all her eager warriors back around the fort as more reinforcements poured in from above. She expected the pivotal battle to begin shortly, as soon as a critical mass of warriors appeared, enough to swarm the entire base or spring from the tunnels below. But that did not happen. The faint rumble of chewing suddenly stopped. Darkness returned. Scintillatrix felt momentum transfer. The stars circled in slow arcs. Then, the silver light returned, and she saw the white moon's surface rotate slowly. Scintillatrix and her warriors realized they were suddenly floating free. They each tried to circle their antennae with the zero-G instinct to correct their rotation, only to realize the ineffectiveness of it. They could not stabilize the lump of rock and detached skin they clung to. Greensphere had decided for a neutral strategy: stem the loss and literally chew the enemy off their home. The chill of darkness greeted Scintillatrix. She tried to signal back to her caste along the line, but the colony already understood and hauled everything back to their main rock. Stabilize, she saw the command relayed in the silver moonlight. It took many movements, but she whipped her fellow ants into one direction, and they stopped spinning. Scintillatrix looked off into the distance. There, ahead and above, the green sphere floated away. Small puffs of steam jetted out from behind Greensphere as they tried to climb into a higher orbit. It still rotated, and she saw a large scar of white flesh on it. Back home, Scintillatrix was mined for memories. The dream ants assembled again. They survived another orbit, but now their sighters reported alarming news. They had fallen in. Impact was inevitable. Death would follow. The end. For now, at least. This has been Space Ants, Brace for Impact. An original composition by Eric Kay, copyright 2024. This audio has been artificially narrated by Revoicer. Subscribe to my channel for more Space Ants, and hit that like button. It makes the ants happy, and helps the colony get through one more orbit. You don't want Space Ants to die, do you?